Ukraine is unravelling fast, torn apart by war, with thousands fleeing. Politics here is changing, the economy is faltering. But underlying all of this is a forgotten epidemic, and Sky News has been to the heart of it.
They can beat you. They can cut you.
500,000 people are living with HIV or AIDS in Ukraine. It is one of the fastest growing epidemics in the world. But the government here is struggling to fund vital drugs, anti-retrovirals, used to prevent the virus spreading from mother to child. This young boy will need anti-retroviral drugs like we need air to breathe.
There is potential for a real disaster, definitely.
I feel that I'm not in Ukraine, that I'm in Africa or somewhere.
And we enter the extraordinary underground world of those who've grown up with AIDS and HIV and ask what's in store for today's children of the epidemic. Ukraine has had a problem with HIV and AIDS ever since it gained independence from the Soviet Union in 1991. Until last year, it had made progress on cutting down on one of the key indicators, the transfer of the virus from mother to child. But Ukraine has been in crisis for nearly a year now, and that rate is beginning to rise again.
Budget probably today is not really enough to fulfill all the needs. I would say that the impact of this specific crisis is also enabling to bring to the surface a lot of the weaknesses.
The problem is the cost of these drugs, which are used to prevent or suppress the spread of HIV. They're called anti-retrovirals.
The system is breaking down on one end, and secondly, there is a shortage of anti-retrovirals. That's definitely the case.
Because they cost money?
Because they cost money, they're expensive. The international community is there to support, but probably not enough to fulfill all the needs.
So children are being born with HIV when they should never have been born with HIV.
That's right.
It doesn't get any bigger of a crisis than that, does it?
Absolutely, because there is potential for a real disaster.
There is one place in Ukraine where children with AIDS can be treated. Where they feel protected from the huge stigma that still exists here. Well, we've been invited to visit a hospital here in Kiev which specifically treats children who are HIV positive, many of whom contracted the virus from their mothers. And the truth is, we've got no idea what it's going to be like inside until we get there. Oh, thank you. The Okhmadet clinic is the only one of its kind in Ukraine, and this is the first time that cameras have been allowed inside. It treats children with HIV and tuberculosis, the other major epidemic here. To save money, they switch off the lights and turn down the heating, even though it's -2 outside.
We take all severe cases, all difficult cases from of Ukraine. Usually we have a co-infection HIV and TB. In 80% probably now in our hospital, children have a TB. When doctors, oncologists and hematologists see HIV status, they are very frightened, and they with big pleasure leave these children in our hospitals.
There is room for 20 children here, and it's full. The failure to prevent the virus from spreading to children is laid bare here. And for those who have no parents, it can be as good as it gets. These are just two of the children here in this hospital. This is Rustam, who is 5 months old. He was born HIV positive, anti-retrovirals, too late to prevent the transfer of this virus. He is destined for a life in an orphanage. And this is Sasha, who is 3 years old. He has a drug-resistant tuberculosis as well as full-blown AIDS. And in the coming weeks, he will end up in an orphanage. An orphanage in Ukraine is a life of uncertainty. And this young boy will need anti-retroviral drugs like we need air to breathe. It will be for life. The problem for children like Sasha and Rustam is the government is running out of money and is desperate to make savings.
First of all, it's very expensive treatment. And our government prefer to save money and buy cheaper treatment, cheaper drugs, Indian or any other production, but not very good quality.
Dima has AIDS, but his parents don't. His mother says she has no idea how he contracted it. What they do know is that his late grandfather was HIV positive.
5 месяцев мы пытались у ребенка вылечить кашель, так как он не лечился, я самостоятельно сдала тест на ВИЛ. То, честно говоря, немножко побаиваюсь выйти на улицу, и если, не дай бог, кто-то узнает о статусе моего ребенка.
It's not like influenza that it's going in air and you can just catch it from air. We explain the way of transmission of HIV. We explain everything, but still we have a high level of stigma.
The Ministry of Health in Kiev. 6 months of political turmoil have shaken Ukraine's finances. The government has been forced to sign a $17 billion bailout with the International Monetary Fund. That means there's less money to spend on health. This is also the new home for a new health minister. Just a month in the job, this is Alexandra Vitashvili, and he says on the whole Ukraine is coping.
We're very well prepared to face the challenges and again to send clear messages with assistance to the international donors.
What are you seeing here? What's your message? Are you happy with the way Ukraine is handling its HIV/AIDS epidemic? Are you sitting here telling me you're happy with it?
Given the situation in the country, overall situation, given the full-blown Russian aggression war that we're facing, given the financial crisis, given a total mismanagement of the country by the previous government for 3 to 4 years, yes, given all that, we are at least having a grip on the situation with HIV/AIDS.
But when presented with the figures that there's actually been a rise in the rate of transferal from mother to baby, the minister is not so sure, so he takes advice.
Okay, so there's an do you want to continue?
Yeah.
Okay. There was an increase in 2013 compared to 2012 by 1%. We're getting data for 2014 now. Now, obviously, that needs to be taken care of. Whether if it requires more money or redirecting or spending money more effectively through effective programs, that's another issue. So we have to look at that on why did we have this increase in 2013.
Sasha wanders the hospital calling for his mother, but she abandoned him a year ago. So what are his prospects? What could life have in store for him?
Where will the children who are born today be in 10 years' time?
Unfortunately, nowhere, meaning there is a serious risk to go towards a lost generation, definitely.
You are angry, frightened, scared, frustrated, all of these things?
Maybe yes, because because I don't know how to help what to do in this situation.
With the number of children, born to HIV increasing, and very limited chances to actually ensure proper care and proper treatment for them.
This is Odessa in the south, where the first case of AIDS entered Ukraine in 1987. And we've come here to meet the lost children of this epidemic. Now older and in poor health, they are the forgotten casualties of Ukraine's AIDS war. A 2-year-old boy lives here, and many have HIV or full-blown AIDS. It is an underground home for an underground life. In the spring of 1987, a 22-year-old man became the first person to be diagnosed as HIV positive in Ukraine, here in the southern Black Sea port of Odessa. It was the beginning of an epidemic that still has a tight grip here. Once a thriving town, it was known as the Soviet Chicago. Today it's run down and depressed. Odessa also has the highest concentration of AIDS and HIV anywhere in Europe. Many have no choice but to live in the shadows. We've come here to find out how life has turned out for some of the children who've grown up with AIDS in Ukraine.
At what age have you been on the streets?
So he since the age of 9. С какого возраста вы были на улице? Ну, большую часть времени. From my age of 10. From the age of 6. Андрей, да? Да. И Вадима тоже.
They need help, and they get it from time to time. On a cold night like this, hot food, bread and something warm to drink is welcome. They have no family or parents. This is Vova. He's 22 and he's had AIDS since he was 14. We find him being treated by an outreach nurse on the streets. He injects chemicals like pain thinner and ethanol, but what he really needs is anti-retrovirals. And if he doesn't get them, he'll die. The nurse is asked to go into a makeshift hostel to treat another man. Vladimir Kovaluk, a charity worker, agrees to take us inside.
What's the risk of going in here?
The risk is that they can beat you. They can cut you. If you will not honor the rules, they will start to be very aggressive.
I think you need to wear that
Because of the high levels of tuberculosis here, we're all told to wear masks. The chemical drugs the man's been on, combined with his AIDS, is having a terrible impact on his body. He's in the corner on a bed. And when he peels away a bandage, it reveals a huge sore. 3 of his toes have literally dropped off. The chemical drugs have eaten through the muscle.
No? The nurse is now in there healing it. I haven't seen anything like that, ever. The smell was acrid, there was crates of beer everywhere, and the conditions were horrendous, and that is how they live in there.
There is very little help for people with HIV and AIDS in towns like Odessa. Charities take the strain where the government fails to help. Access to medical care, education and housing are a huge problem for people living with AIDS, and so many have to live wherever they can. We've been told about a family who live underground. They all have AIDS, apart from one, a 2-year-old boy. But to get to them we have to go down into a basement and then through a labyrinth of hot water pipes that feed the buildings above. And you can smell the cat urine everywhere. There are clothes, and you can feel the warmth coming off the pipes. And up above, the streets of Odessa just go on. And down there, the man tells me that's the toilet down there. The first person we see is Misha, a toddler. His mother only contracted HIV after he was born. She's a sex worker by night, and she's left him with his auntie. There are 4 separate families living down here. Most grew up in Ukraine's crowded orphanages. Some were born with AIDS, some contracted it growing up. Lena grew up on the street, injected chemicals, and ended up in prison. This strange subterranean world is home. How easy is it to access drugs, anti-retrovirals and things like that?
Я не сижу на терапии. Нет, я боюсь терапии, потому что многие люди умирают от нее, мне нормально пока что без терапии.
This bleak existence provides an insight into the kind of world today's children with AIDS may have in store for them. We say goodbye to the families and make our way back up to the surface. Until recently, children with AIDS and HIV found it almost impossible to go to nursery or school. Some parents were too worried that their children might catch the virus somehow. But there are places where children can go. This charity in Odessa helps youngsters deal with their HIV or AIDS. Rustem Asanov was once a street child living with HIV here in Odessa. As a drug addict, he stole from shops to feed himself. Now he works at the charity helping the children here.
Я когда узнал, что у меня ВИЧ, то я отреагировал это как нормальный человек, потому что я знал, что я просто среди людей таких живу, я знаю, что...
I ask Rustem what he thinks the prospects are for children like Sasha, the boy we met in the children's hospital in Kiev.
Я хочу вам сказать, что у нас сейчас напомнить, что у нас сейчас военное положение в стране вообще. Сейчас государство, оно все финансирование делает на оборону. Большинство денег уходит сейчас на оборону.
Back in Kiev, campaigners are urging the new government here to put more money into the AIDS program. The Global Fund for Fighting AIDS continues to support Ukraine, but there are no guarantees for the future.
Health issues now, especially HIV issue, is not a priority for the government.
Pavlo Scala campaigns on behalf of people with HIV and AIDS. What effect is the crisis in Ukraine having on, do you think, the government's ability to maintain some kind of HIV/AIDS program?
So most of the budget is going to defense, to law enforcement, and all activities, most activities related to this crisis in the eastern Crimea.
So all of the work that's gone on in Ukraine over the last few years could begin to unravel?
Yes, it might be a disaster.
The funds that are committed by the government are appropriately high enough to cover all the gaps. The assistance of international donors, including the Global Fund, which recently approved $133 million 3-year project assisting HIV and TB, are there.
So as a government you don't need to put any more funds into the fighting of HIV and AIDS?
If we need to put more funds, we have an open doors with UNICEF, with Global Fund and the others to go back and ask for
with your
more
money, not external funding, not funding from UNICEF. Are you saying that as a government you're not committing any more public funds from the public budget to the fight against HIV and AIDS? Because that's what they say is necessary.
meanwhile, the government has committed money that the government could spare.
If we don't act today, if we don't accelerate efforts, if we don't support as it is needed, definitely we are going to see this epidemics, growing even faster.
I understand that we need to change this system, but I'm afraid that people who are on the top, they don't understand in which way it should be changed, and they're very far from people.
It's a real situation that they cannot get any additional money from the state budget because it's almost empty.
He doesn't know it yet, but baby Rustem faces huge challenges in his life. The stigma of having AIDS and the perils of having the state as a parent.
That's fine. I'm on the tracks, don't worry.
He could get a good orphanage. It's possible. He could get a bad one. It is the lottery of his life. Sasha is spending his first nights in a Ukrainian orphanage. His future, like so many others, is unknown. Doctors say if he received the right drugs at the right time, his life could have been so very different.